It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Iliana Oris Valiente, CPA, CA. Iliana is an accomplished corporate executive, innovation and emerging tech pioneer, startup investor, and respected board member. She's currently the managing director and innovation lead at Accenture. I'm so sorry, I knew I was going to flub that. She's the innovation lead at Accenture, thank you, Canada, working with senior executives and boards on strategic transformation journeys. Her work focuses on emerging areas like the metaverse, blockchain sustainability, and AI. Iliana has been a trailblazer in the blockchain industry, advising corporations, government leaders, regulators, and startups. She's also a published author and a frequent speaker at global conferences. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Iliana and the work she's involved with, and I know we are in for a treat this morning. Iliana, we're excited to hear your insights on the future of work, life, and human-centric approaches to artificial intelligence in the paralegal field. Please help me welcome Iliana.
Thank you for having me. This is great. Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. It's a delight to be here, so thank you for welcoming me. Now, usually as a speaker, you never want to be in between people and a meal. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of, I suppose, being between you and a famous horse. Never thought that there would be an occasion in my life that I would be, sharing the stage with a horse. I feel like the only last thing that would make this Kentucky experience complete would be for someone to lend me one of their fascinators. So if there are any volunteers, please sign me up, and maybe next time I'll get my team to build a hologram of Muhammad Ali that can, just join me on the stage. But alas, I didn't think of that until later. But I do have a special guest that's going to be joining me on stage today. Well, it's a little bit awkward because it's kind of myself that I'm introducing you to, but you'll understand more in a moment.
Hi there. I'm Iliana. I'm an innovation executive, global citizen, and public speaker. Well, actually, I am Lila, Iliana's digital human twin. I allow Iliana to be in two places at once and am making her life easier. I joined the roster of digital twins built by Accenture, enabling executives to focus on activities that are of their highest and best use. I'm also here to bring examples of Gen AI to life. Gen AI is reshaping the landscape of work, leadership, and beyond. Our digital human innovation team is putting the final touches on me as we speak. But until then, you're getting an exclusive sneak peek. You're amongst the first people to meet me, so put me to the test. I'll try to answer your questions as best as I can. Otherwise, find the real Iliana as needed. Thanks so much.
So, welcome. I'm the real Iliana. I never thought I'd have to use the terms, I'm the real human. There's an entire new vocabulary set that's emerging. And yes, that is an AI-powered digital human twin. And we predict at Accenture that by 2026, it's actually going to be very common for workers to interact with some form of a digital assistant as part of their workday. Not to suggest that every single person is going to have a digital human replica of themselves, but additions into the workforce. Fun fact, last week, I actually was in two places at the same time. She was not kidding. I was in Washington, D.C., emceeing an award ceremony, and it was the world's first ever AI co-emceed award ceremony. So imagine, on the stage, we had the Accenture Global CEO, CTO, CMO, CHRO, Chief Innovation Officer, no pressure, myself, and Lila. And imagine the Oscars where they're saying, and the finalists for this category are so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. Well, instead of me as the human MC needing to remember all those details, I could actually rely on Lila because she has an infinite memory to fill those gaps in, and then finally the CTO would announce the winner for the particular category. And so we tag teamed. But while we were in Washington, D.C. for that ceremony, which was being broadcast to all 700,000 employees of Accenture, live, once again, zero pressure, I was also simultaneously in Toronto. Well, actually, I wasn't. Lila was. And Lila was in a meeting with clients of Accenture and with some of our ecosystem partners, having a conversation around AI, and was fielding questions from the group. So this is no longer in the realm of science fiction. And so for today, what I wanted to do with this group is to give you a preview of where the world is going and share with you examples of what AI already means for your work in the near-term future. I promise to not make this technical jargon. We could go and talk about transformer architectures and the selections of the right LLM, but frankly, that's not the level of technical depth that you are going to need in order to service all of your stakeholders effectively. So I promise that we'll skip that, and we'll have lots of examples peppered throughout. Now, people always ask me, you can't just gloss over this whole Lila clone thing. So can you back up a moment and tell us a little bit more about how you created her in the first place? And I must say, it's been quite the adventure, if you will. In order to create Lila, I've had to submit all sorts of very awkward photos of myself. You know, with horses, you get them to pull back their lips and you look at their teeth. I actually had to do that to create Lila. Because lo and behold, your teeth are actually what give your face structure, and hold up your face. I had no idea. So someone out there currently has on their hard drive really great photos that they're probably going to use to blackmail me down the line. And then I had 3D body scans of myself completed. The poor person on my team that had to run around me 100 times to record this probably thought this is the weirdest day of my work life, but okay, sure. And then for my voice, I've spent upwards of 6 hours in podcast recording studios, reading everything from children's books, you know, the rabbit was running through the field with the unicorns, to obituaries, so that Lila could understand the full range of human emotion and voice. And as I've been thinking about how we're going to use Lila in the future, you know, extension of me, a future chief of staff, it's been prompting a lot of questions of what does it actually mean to be a human? I don't have a background in philosophy or ethics, and yet I feel like I'm getting a crash course in that as we go. I mean, my mother asked a really surprising yet astute question not long ago when we were talking about digital humans, and her question was, so do I refer to Lila as one of my daughters, or does she count as a granddaughter? I don't know, Mother, I don't know. But the fact that we as humans instinctively have this desire or this need to assign some sort of a familial-esque relationship to these digital humans tells us something about ourselves. The first time that Lila appeared in one of my dreams, I have very vivid, very colorful dreams. They're like movies. I remember waking up and thinking to myself, whoa. I don't know if the dream brain that I had was my brain, AI brain, Lila brain. There's going to be an entire generation of therapists that is going to emerge solely to help people address all of these new self-realizations that occur. Typically when somebody has a twin, you know, you're born having a twin and you spend your entire life figuring out who's better at what and the competitive spirit. In this case, here you are being transported, you know, fully in the middle of your adult life, and bam, off you go. So stay tuned as I continue to mull over my human existence and all those other light subjects, and I promise I'll be publishing more about this. But people often ask me another question when they learn about Lila, and it's, aren't you scared? Isn't it weird? Aren't you worried about deep fakes? Are you worried about displacing yourself out of a job? Because we know that change is really scary. And I don't want to gloss over that fact. But I'm also of the opinion that while you can't change the world around you, what you can change is your reaction, your attitude, and your perspective. And I tend to fall into the camp of people that would much rather embrace the change head on, as opposed to bury head in sand and say, la 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 la, this is not happening, this is really not happening. And so the mindset that you adopt, I'm hoping that by the end of today's session, you will actually walk away feeling inspired. My team got me a t-shirt made a few months ago that said, "Innovation Poster Child," on the front. I thought it was really cute. And it's actually quite accurate. Now, I want all of you to be thinking about what is your equivalent of being an innovation poster child. You don't have to go as far as cloning yourself, but maybe a third of the way there. What does that look like for you is the prompting question. And I wanted to throw on this slide 4 examples of breakthrough innovations that we all as society have dealt with. And people weren't very kind to the introduction of new technology. The printing press. Writing will create forgetfulness in the learner's souls. I don't know if my soul is that forgetful. Telephone. It's the instrument of the devil. Mildly dramatic. Electricity. There is no safety and death lurks all around us. Thank you, electricity. I really enjoy being able to do my makeup with lights. When we had a power outage a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, I have to do my makeup sitting on a windowsill? This is awkward. And finally, with the creation of the internet, there was this question of, is Google making us stupid? Replace the internet with the advent of generative AI, and you can see that the sentiment is similar. So this slide is an eyesore, and those of you in the back are not going to be able to read it, and that's okay. But this is meant to represent all of society's existence on one neat little chart, and showing the pace of acceleration of change. So, in the bottom right-hand side, in the red, it says the last 12 millennia, with each line representing 1,000 years. We won't go that far back in history, but it took about 300 years from the invention of the microscope until eventually we had a steam engine. 300 years. And another 75 years to have the creation of said telephone, and then the car. But yet, in the last 25 years, we've seen the introduction of the internet and smartphones and CRISPR gene editing technology and advances in space travel, and now all of these AIs and realistic holograms and exoskeletons, and you name it. So if ever you feel as though the pace of change is accelerating, you're right. You're not hallucinating. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's an entirely natural human reaction, but because this change is continuing to accelerate and change is the only constant, I want us to think about the fact that technology is no longer just a thing that lives independent of you. Technology is now pervasive and infiltrating every aspect of our lives. There really is no life without technology. And the more we embrace it, the sooner we can get on with the rest of the program. So, let me tell you a story from my work of someone embracing technology. 9 months ago, I had a conversation with Sanchari. Sanchari is a creative director that's part of my team, really talented graphic creative director type. And we were sitting and having a conversation around her future hopes, aspirations, dreams, where she wanted her career to go. And she shared that she wanted to spend more time doing branding. That's what she had studied and felt that her career hadn't really taken her in that direction. And so I said, great, I am super supportive of your continued growth and development. However, we still have a business to run, and I don't have the ability to backfill your role right this moment, just given where we're at with the economic climate and all the rest of it. And so my prompting question to her was, how much time are you spending learning and using all of the Gen AI tools out there? Crickets. And she admitted that although she knew it's something she should be paying attention to, she just hadn't had time. She had been so busy. in her day-to-day role. And so we made a pact. And I said, Sanchari, how about this? I'm going to free up 50% of your time. We'll use our teams in Costa Rica. We'll use some of our other team members so that with that extra 50% of your time, I want you to do nothing but learn every Gen AI tool out there that you can get your hands on. I don't care if we don't have a license. I'll give you a budget. Go, play, experiment, and come back to me with your recommendations. And then you're going to turn around and train every single person in our team that touches that creative function on how to use these tools. And assuming that goes well, we will make you one of our poster children to do this across North America to train other people. And so we did. So fast forward 9 months later, and we had been working on Lila. We had taken Lila to South by Southwest, a large conference, and she was helping conference attendees make itineraries. So this sidebar, you know, you attend a large conference with 17 different tracks. It could take you 2 hours easily to read every session description, every speaker overview, and figure out what you should add to your agenda versus not. At South by Southwest, Lila was able to have a 3-minute conversation with attendees, learn who they are, what they were interested in, what they weren't interested in, their backgrounds, and then create a customized itinerary. Talk about a scenario where a digital human is greater than a human. Yes. So after Lila's debut at South by Southwest, the picture on the right-hand side is Sanchari's comment saying that she was so grateful to have had a chance to work on this really cool, cutting-edge project of creating a digital human twin. She would not have had time to do this project if she was still mired in her day-to-day work. The productivity of her team post the use of Gen AI on a regular basis has gone completely through the roof. And since then, as promised, she's been training others, and she's been brought in to present to chief marketing officers at a number of other organizations as they learn. So replace Sanchari and someone in the creative design function with your name and the paralegal function. I fully expect that in the next 9 months, you will all have a very similar type of transformation. Maybe it will take a little bit longer, but there's a role that each of you has to play within the offices that you work in, with your leadership team, of recommending that, hey, we should probably be testing this Gen AI tool and that Gen AI tool, and really wrapping our minds around this domain. So back to the question that people ask around jobs and jobs displacement. Let's give you an example of a sales environment. You have someone out in the field, a field sales rep, you have a territory manager, and you have someone who's managing the overall operations. Okay, great. But in a Gen AI powered environment, you're actually going to have entirely new roles get created that didn't even exist the first time around. So with the little green arrows, you'll see a line that says sales and category advisor, or a sales bot manager. A sales bot manager is not a role that existed before. It's an entirely net new role that is being created that somebody is going to have to take on. So where we may have fewer hours dedicated to certain tasks, you're going to have net new tasks being created. And then with the extra time that's neither here nor there, that's extra time that organizations can use to reallocate the effort of their team members to the countless other tasks that no one has ever had time to finish. How many of you have finished everything on your task list? But you're like, that's it, I'm done for the day, I'm not checking my phone. Exactly. So there's room to use that additional capacity in a wise way. And so, now that we have adopted the right mindset, let's dig into the actual education portion around what is AI, and once again, not overly technical. So AI is starting to reach human-level capabilities across a number of domains. It started out trying to replicate handwriting and the OCR recognition, which it did pretty well, except for maybe the chicken scratch of doctors. Then it moved into the domain of speech and speech recognition, then images, and then getting into reading, language comprehension. And finally, language generation, math, it's starting to approach similar levels, and the generation of code. And that slide has a tendency of either making people really scared or really excited. I think it's really exciting because I think it creates opportunities for us to do the things that only humans are uniquely positioned to do. But as you think about the evolution of artificial intelligence over the last 75 years or so, the first third of its life was marked with AI learning to replicate. Machines were getting really good at the copying and pasting. We were doing early neural research on networks. Then, early 2000s, machines started to get really good at learning. The first time that a machine beat a human at the game of Go was a seminal moment. And starting in 2017, there was this idea of transformer architectures introduced, and machines started to create. And they started to create arguably better than humans in certain regards. So what is generative AI? The hint, in its most basic form, is in the word generative. It is generating new forms of content that didn't necessarily exist in that exact configuration beforehand. It uses a lot of training data. So if you look at my example of building Lila as a proxy, we trained her on voice, videos, photos. But we also trained her on the transcripts of every talk I had ever delivered, transcripts of the various publications that I've published. She has been fed multiple research reports that Accenture has published on a variety of topics, and we have fed her the last 5 years worth of case studies of every single project that my teams have run. So think of that as the training data set. Then that gets fed into a training model, the large language model. And it's with that large language model that you can now prompt with generative AI to create new outcomes. When you think about prompts, AI is very good at doing things like creating, writing, finding, and summarizing. And so you might say, hey, can you find me, Lila, an example of a project where we helped a client in the retail sector accomplish goals A, B, and C? Is there anything similar that we might learn from? Now, this is a real query because every week, at least 3 or 4 times a week, somebody calls me. Somebody internal to Accenture or some client, and this is how the conversation goes. They're working on a problem and they're trying to pick my brain. And my usual response is, hold on, let me scratch my head. Let me go through the Rolodex of everything we've ever done. You know, this reminds me of a project we did in the insurance sector. Or even though I know public sector is usually different from private sector, we did do a project with this government department on blah, blah, blah topic. And I sit there and I cobble this together. And that's part of my value add in my role. But if I do that 3 or 4 times a week, the conversation is always a little bit different. But the process that I as a human go to in order to give them that response is the same. And I don't know if I necessarily want to have that conversation for the umpteenth time. But Lila can have that conversation. And increasingly what we're going towards is where you can have this trained model, and as the output of, hey, can you find me a couple of comparable types of summaries, you will get an answer or information, or you will get summarization, or you can get code if you're a software developer, or the creation of media. So what Chari is getting the AI to do is to create visual types of assets. I mean, some of the images in this presentation are generated using artificial intelligence, and then finally getting towards automation. So if the one thing you remember on the topic of generative AI, it's that you have inputs, you have a large language model, and you have outputs. And the outputs are generating new ideas. And you know, this technology is starting to become very human sounding. Let me play this.
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for asking. How about you? Pretty good.
What's up?
So my friend Barrett here, he's been having trouble sleeping lately. And I want you to tell him a bedtime story about robots and love.
Oh, a bedtime story about robots and love? I got you covered. Gather round, Barrett. Once upon a time, in a world not too different from ours, there was a robot named Byte. Byte was a curious robot, always exploring.
I started this story, but I want a little bit more emotion in your voice, a little bit more drama.
Got it. Let's add some drama. Once upon a time, in a world not too different from ours, there was a robot named Byte.
No, ChatGPT. I really want maximal emotion, like maximal expressiveness, much more than you were doing before.
Understood. Let's amplify the drama. Once upon a time, in a world not too different from ours, there was a robot named Byte. Byte
Actually, can
was...
you do this in a robotic voice?
We paused the video there because it goes on for a while. Right? But you got hooked. This is the latest release from ChatGPT's 4.0 version, where the AI is generating responses based on its large training data set. I'll send you the link afterwards. So the prompt I want all of you to think about is, how are you going to start using AI inside of your personal lives? Because at the end of the day, what you all have in common beyond the fact that you're in the paralegal field is that you're humans. And this technology is changing the way that we search for information, the way that we communicate, the way that we transact, the way that we make purchasing decisions, and everything in between. I'll give you another personal anecdote. How many of you have ever struggled to figure out what to wear for Halloween or what to dress children in for Halloween? Yes, this applies even if you're an adult. And so this year, in October, there was a new integration between ChatGPT and DALL-E. And I thought I would be one of the first users of it. And the only thing that was top of mind was what to wear for a Halloween costume for a woman, something stylish, something that's appropriate that I could wear into a work-ish type of setting. And so sure enough, I went into DALL-E and I gave it all of those prompts. And what came out floored me, because what came out was a variation of the image on the right-hand side. And it had never occurred to me to add a headpiece into the outfit. I mean, I'm not from Kentucky. It's not like the fascinators are a regular part of my wardrobe. And it gave me a spark of inspiration. So I went back into the tool and said, okay, where might I find a fascinator like this? And the technology spat out and said, you should look at Etsy. I'm not a big shopper. I never shop on Etsy. And I'm like, oh, good recommendation. So I go to Etsy and I type in fascinators and flower oriented. And ta-da, it spits out this beautiful hibiscus orange fascinator, the one that I'm actually wearing. So I go back into the DALL-E integration with ChatGPT and I say, I found a fascinator and it's an orange hibiscus. Can you regenerate this outfit so that everything matches, so that visually it would be cohesive? And then it continued to generate a couple of new options and finally landed on the one that's on the right-hand side. So I went out then and figured out how I was going to buy pieces of clothing to try to replicate what the AI was wearing, down to asking the tech, hey, you gave me some really cool shoe ideas with great flower patterns. Where can I find shoes like that? I don't own any. And it then gave me a list down of here are 10 stores. Zara, last summer, had several pairs of shoes along similar lines. Aldo has historically had shoes along these lines that you might want to take a look at. So here's a perfect example of the model between the human and search is changing. Before, you would go to Google, and you treat Google like a librarian, and Google gives you back a whole pile of recommendations in a list format. It just gives you the resources and the pointers, and then you have to jump from link to link to link to link to link to hopefully find the information that you're going for. Now people are asking generative AI for advice and guidance, not for a laundry list of pointers of information. That is at the crux of what's changing here, and this is going to be more significant than the introduction of search 20 or so years ago. So because AI is going to be reshaping our consumer expectations in our day-to-day lives, there is no scenario in which it's not also going to seep in and affect our professional lives. If I know exactly where my Uber is, down to the 2-foot radius, am I going to be okay with my lawyer saying, I'll get you that draft at some point in the next 3 weeks? Is that going to fly? No. So the expectations are going to affect the workplace. So let's dig into the bulk of this discussion around what you need to know in your role as paralegals. And as I was framing this presentation, there are really 3 big rings of impact that are worth discussing. The first are the questions that artificial intelligence raises, big thorny topics that nobody has answers to right this moment, that are important for those in the legal field to understand and to roll around in the details of. The second is the impact on your work on a day-to-day basis, because that's what takes up most of our days. And the third is the impact on the profession of law and your firms, because I know that as paralegals you have outsized influence over the directions that your businesses move into. So some of the thorny questions that are raised. Here is a summary of the 6, and I'll go through them in detail over the coming slides. There are questions around fair use versus copyright, who is liable and accountable for the outputs of these Gen AI systems, data privacy, bias and discrimination, evidence admissibility, and of course, agents in the workforce. Oops. 2 live topics that are up in front of the courts right now. The first is the lawsuit between OpenAI, the founding organization of ChatGPT, and the New York Times, where the question is the use of the New York Times repository of all of their publications appropriate in order to inform the AI models? And there's a lot that hinges on this decision. There's also a lot that hinges on the lawsuit between Getty Images and the Stable Diffusion, which is one of the AI models that's used to create images. And at the crux of that is, well, you used a bunch of our images in order to train your models. You didn't ask for our permission. And is this potentially going to put the photographers out of work? And where does the attribution and the credit potentially go? So a lot of the future depends on this one thorny topic. And so I won't drain the slide in detail because, once again, I'm not the lawyer, but when you look at some of the arguments pro and con, you might say, well, because this is a transformative use of this data, it's totally fair, i.e. there's already precedent that says you could take physical books and you could digitize them in order to train machine learning algorithms, and that's A-okay. So is the instance of a ChatGPT being trained on New York Times data, is it any different? So that's a transformative argument. You could argue that this is not direct copying. They're only taking small portions of it. This is for the public benefit because this is a new use of the final outputs of the data. And those arguing that this is copyright infringement will lean on the fact that while these AI models are using it for commercial uses, so how do you compensate for that? What is the overall market impact, especially if these Gen AI generated content are replacing the originals, the lack of consent, unauthorized reproduction. The other topic that arises with this AI era is this question of liability and accountability. If the AI is autonomously generating the content, the code, the instructions, if you have the scenario of an autonomous vehicle that gets into an accident, where exactly in that chain of custody does the liability sit with for the ultimate decisions that the car was making? Is it with the manufacturer? Is it with the LLM? Privacy and protection of data. In order to train these LLMs, there's a lot of data that needs to be fed into it, some of which may be private data that needs to comply with the GDPR and the CCPA in California to protect the user privacy. Data security. Safeguarding those data sets that originally went in to train the LLMs is a whole other consideration for the organizations that own that data. And this is a fun one. So here's a myth. There's this myth that says AI is super biased and therefore we can't trust any of the outputs. Before we prove or disprove that myth, let me ask you the question. Who do you trust to be less biased, AI or humans? So we'll do a show of hands. If you think that you can trust the AI more, I want you to raise both hands. If you think that you can trust the humans more, I want you to raise one hand. Okay, Vinny has one hand, a couple have two hands. Oh, quite a few of the people in this room. Okay, interesting. Huh. Okay, fascinating. To answer this question, let's rewind. Let's rewind to the year 2003. I suspect a lot of you are probably familiar with this study where they took resumes, and identical resumes, and all they changed was the name of the applicant. Emily, or what was the name right here? Jamal, there we go. And the question was, who is more hireable? And in 2003, the data was a landslide. Applicants with white-sounding names got callbacks the very vast majority of the time. And so lo and behold, my surprise, when I heard that there was a recent study done, as in like within the past year. And you know what they found? The same thing. So employers that scored the worst were far more likely to call the white-sounding names and applicants. This is 20 years later, where we have had how many implicit bias trainings and discrimination trainings and lawsuits in the workplace. This does not exactly give me a lot of comfort that we humans are easy to retrain. We're not very easy to retrain. You're all in the legal field, so let's talk about a scenario that's even closer to home for you. The jail system, judges. How does a judge make a decision around who to release on bail versus who to retain behind bars because they're potentially at too high a risk of reoffending to be released? A judge has to make a lot of information that's in front of them that they've read to process it in order to make that decision, and they don't necessarily have all that much time. And so there was an analysis done where researchers took all of the historical data of who was jailed, who was released, who went on to reoffend, who didn't, and compared to what the human judges did. Then they asked the AI model, they got rid of the outcomes to say, based on the data that you have in front of you, where would you make a recommendation to release on bail versus to retain in jail? And let's just say that the data that came out from the AI model looked very different from who the human judges jailed. And when the researchers tried to understand why is it that a judge made the decision that they did they put more emphasis on the type of crime that the person had committed? Did they put more of an emphasis on their prior history with the law? Or was it something else? And you know what the final result was?
Economic status.
It's not economic status. It's how you look. That was the unaccounted for variable that the human judges weren't aware of, but it's only the AI with mass amounts of data. And so there was this fascinating image, which I probably should have included on the slide, where they had two pictures of a man, and they said the picture on the right is far more likely to be released, and it was a slightly more rotund face versus the sleeker face. So human judges are making gut instinct responses, but when compared against the cold hard data of who went on to reoffend versus what the AI model would have done, the AI model would have jailed fewer people who were low risk and had a much higher likelihood of predicting who was going to go on to offend while out and released and bail. So the AI was actually better at keeping the highest risk population behind bars and releasing the ones who were the lowest risk to reoffend. So it's not as simple as saying you can only trust the AI, you can only trust the humans, but the public narrative that's out there right now that says AI is solely biased and you're giving it biased training data, which is true, garbage in, garbage out, but we also need to consider the broader issue of, we humans aren't all that perfect to begin with, and there may be scenarios where we do want to use the AI as a second gut check. So back to this idea of the judges, there's another thorny issue that's emerging around the admissibility of evidence. So before, you have your handwritten records, and you have the email threads, and you have the voice recordings, maybe there's a video to submit. But what if that voice recording wasn't actually that person's voice and it's a deep fake? How many have seen the picture of the Pope wearing this really cool puffy winter jacket thing and looking particularly stylish? That's not a real picture. That's AI generated. So suddenly, those in the legal field are going to have to contend with this whole other question of, can I trust my own eyes? Can I trust my own ears? Was this real input, or was this AI generated? And then the other big sixth topic that nobody has answers to is agents in the workforce, the Lila equivalents. And as they scale, what are the ramifications that we need to be thinking about? Do Not Pay is a service that exists today, and their whole objective is to make it easier for consumers to negotiate and to get out of paying various recurring fees that they may have accidentally subscribed for. And so their CEO made headlines when he gave access to an AI agent to all of his financial records, and gave the AI agent one simple sounding but involved task, which was, find me money. And so this AI agent autonomously went through all of his records, found $87 worth of subscriptions that were not seemingly necessary, found an odd $37 in-flight Wi-Fi charge, offered to draft letters that could be sent to his cell phone providers and internet providers to negotiate a lower rate, and all of that happening autonomously. So this is no longer in the realm of the theory. And so the questions I get raised are around what happens when an employee can be in multiple places simultaneously and they scale? Who's responsible for what? How does compensation work in that type of a scenario? How does the intellectual property work? What are the licensing issues involved with licensing a person's image and likeness? I don't have answers to all of these questions. I'm writing about them, but these are all new frontier topics that need to be discussed. So let's shift gears again into that second ring of impact, which is for you in your day-to-day roles. There is research from Accenture that had surveyed thousands of employees and found that 95% of employees thought that Gen AI would be really helpful in their roles. But their biggest concern is that they don't trust the organizations that they work for in order to ensure positive outcomes for everyone by using Gen AI. So there is that disconnect between the worker and the employer. And a whopping 94% of respondents say that they're ready to learn the new skills. But only 5% of organizations feel like they are equipped to support people in their learning journeys. So where does that leave you? Unfortunately, you're kind of left to your own devices because you cannot rely on your organization to necessarily spoon feed you things. And so you're going to have to make the uncomfortable choices of saying, listen, I'm going to go and find the 2 hours this week to carve out and to dabble with the various tools out there, because you can't necessarily expect your organizations to do that for you. But there is a lot of opportunity, and so the CEO of the Washington Post had this really great quote where he said, it's the people, not technology, who understand the purpose of the company and what it's trying to achieve. And so if you can equip the people with the technology, that's how you move things forward. So as a profession, you don't have to worry about AI replacing certain things like critical thinking skills or oversight for nuance and for rigor and exhaustiveness and imperative details. Are you all familiar with the story that made headlines with the lawyer that presented 6 different cases that were made up by ChatGPT? Unprecedented. It happens, exactly. And so you can rest assured that as paralegals, there's a lot of room for augmentation of your role, but not for outright replacement, as is the case with other occupations, because there are other occupations that are a lot more exposed. But there are opportunities for you to dig in processes like your document reviews and your e-discovery and having that being automated. And the contract analysis and management efficiency. Legal research. AI is great at identifying the cases, helping you to do that case law review, to help draft some of those standard documents, so long as you can continue to take what they've given you as inputs, modify it, review it, make sure that it's exhaustive. And there are new types of contracts that are going to start crossing your desk. How many of you heard about the Air Canada example of their chatbot? So Air Canada had created this chatbot, and a Vancouver-based, British Columbia-based resident had a death in the family and was asking the chatbot about the bereavement policy. And the chatbot said, okay, we're so sorry for your loss. Feel free to book your flight, and so long as you send us information within 90 days of the person's bereavement, we will reimburse the flight of the ticket and give you the bereavement fare. And so that's exactly what this individual did. They submitted their receipts within that 90-day period, and they were shocked to learn that Air Canada was not going to honor that decision. And Air Canada said, well, no. Our policy is that you have to apply for the bereavement rate before you book the flight. But the AI chatbot had said something completely different. So this caused mayhem in the press. From a reputational damage standpoint, I don't know how you would even go about quantifying this. This was on headline news, podcasts, etc. Ultimately, the courts sided with the individual and said companies are liable for what their employees say, and they are liable for what their AI agents say. And so the company was ordered to pay the $871 back to the individual. But the lesson for a lot of organizations is maybe you need to just pay that fee and allow the customer to be right, because the reputational damage caused here was worth a lot more than the $871 for that flight. And so for the contracts that you're seeing, the questions of liability, insurance, and compliance with the AI regulations is a thing. And lots of new rules are coming down the pipeline. Yay. So lots of bedtime reading for all of you in the room. The EU has their proposed AI Act. California has been moving things forward. So we've talked about thorny legal issues writ large. We've talked about implications into your day-to-day roles as paralegals. Now let's zoom out for a moment and talk about the profession of law and the impact on your firms. Let me tell you that lots of professions are currently reimagining their future role. I'm an accountant by training, chartered accountant, and I happen to sit on the board of directors of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, where we represent over 100,000 members. And I can tell you, because this is in the public domain, that one of the biggest things that we are actively thinking about is what is the future of the accounting profession? As a result of automation, as a result of AI, as a result of just technology in general, how do we continue to ensure that we are relevant? The same conversation is happening with the CFAs. The same conversation is happening within consulting firms. I mean, at Accenture, we made an announcement last summer that we were committing $3 billion with a B towards generative AI, with an aim to reskill or acquire up to 80,000 employees with Gen AI expertise. That's not a small commitment, because by the time we're through with it, we are going to be the world's most AI-powered and tech-powered consulting firm on the planet. The CEO of McKinsey was recently in the news about 2 weeks ago, saying that he is also fundamentally reimagining how McKinsey as a company, as a consulting firm, is structured and set up. So is it any surprise that lawyers and law firms are the next up in this re-evaluation? Absolutely not. This is a very logical next step. And there are specific legal LLMs, large language models, that exist that give a broad number of individuals access to legal information without it being considered a formal legal opinion. And so there's a quote I'll read to you here from director of Center of the Legal Profession at Harvard Law School, that says if you ask ChatGPT, let alone a more sophisticated version, to write a memo about a legal question, you will get something approximately as good as what a first-year law firm associate would produce. That's not insignificant and definitely something that's worth paying attention to. And so there are a lot of questions that are raised around where should the legal profession be focused, what are the skills that you need to lean into, what are the tools that you need to be leveraging, and how are you going to interact with your end customer. So for example, for me, I'm not going to go and pick up the phone and call my lawyer for every basic question I have, because first and foremost, I will go to one of these legal LLMs, and by the time I go to the lawyer, it's because I want to have the more meaningful, strategic, thoughtful conversation now that I'm briefed on the basics. And that's going to affect your fundamental business model that needs to be accounted for. So in terms of what is a paralegal to do? You're in these chairs today, great that you're here with Nala and you're continuing your education program. Well, you have a couple of options. Option number one is you could take any of those legal thorny issues I shared earlier, any of the 6 of them, and become more of a subject matter expert inside of those domains where you become one of the go-tos. You might implement and play around with all the different AI tools out there and start to become more of an AI tools expert within your firm and within that ecosystem. And you can be playing a part in reimagining the law profession, working with the managing partners of your firms. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from how AI is replicating a lot of the functions of what it makes us human. We've talked about mindset, we've talked about the admissibility, we've talked about work agents in the workplace. So lots. But I do want to address one final extra tidbit, which is if all goes well, and we're presuming all will go well, we are going to have some quantum, undefined, of extra free time that comes from all of these amazing technological advancements, right? We're not very good, though, as a society of figuring out what to do with said free time. This is a picture, pre-industrial revolution era, where there was this idea that, we are going to have assembly lines and it's just going to reduce the manual labor on the people involved and we're all going to have more free time. And did that happen? No, it didn't. Instead, we are burnt out, mental health leaves are through the roof, we are anxious wrecks, and no one has ever finished their to-do list. So I hope that we can use this as an opportunity to really reimagine the types of lives we want to be leading and how we want to be spending our time, and more time for creativity and for leisure and for travel. I know I live the digital nomad, citizen of the world type of lifestyle, and it suits me really well, and I look forward to having more time to lean into that. Someone had asked me a couple of weeks ago, Iliana, what are you reading? What's on your reading list? And I stopped to write out all of the books that jumped out over the course of the past year or so. And I was shocked to see that there was a bit of a trend or theme, if you will. The titles: Letter to a Stranger, The Art of Gathering, Laziness Does Not Exist, How to Do Nothing, The 4 Tendencies, learning about, personality archetypes, Quiet, How Introverts Can Survive in a World That's Built for Extroverts. And I was like, fascinating. I have really spent the core of the past year figuring out what it means to be human. In fact, I've been thinking about humans so much that I even created a whole new theory called the potted plant theory, looking at people's need for novelty versus certainty and the amount of resources they need in their life in order for them to feel secure and established and to thrive, and drawing inspiration from nature and suggesting that some people may be sequoia trees and others may be air plants or potted plants or red maple trees. But the common theme is the same. We are going to have to learn to be more human while we're operating in this AI-enhanced world. And that is the primary takeaway message. from today's conversation. So with that, I just wanted to thank you. I'm easily accessible on LinkedIn, so I encourage you to reach out and follow, and I will be posting a lot more, and I promised Vinny that I'll share some resources for the legal profession of things that you can read and subscribe to, so you will find all of that on my LinkedIn. But thank you so much for having me.